5 ways a super empath quietly shatters an avoidant's confidence. Most people think a super empath gets crushed by an avoidant. But the truth, a super empath doesn't overpower them. They quietly unravel the avoidant's confidence simply by being who they are. People often assume the one who cares more is automatically the one who loses. But that's not how real emotional power works. A super empath, the person who feels deeply, sees clearly, and loves wholeheartedly, has a presence that rattles someone who is avoidant, not because the empath attacks them, but because the empath exposes the truth by simply showing up as their authentic self. Let's talk about 5 quiet, subtle ways a super empath unintentionally shakes an avoidant's confidence. A super empath has this uncanny ability to notice everything that someone else might think is invisible. The subtle flinch when a word hits too close to home, the brief hesitation before answering, the way a body shifts slightly when a certain topic comes up, these tiny details are like flashing neon signs to an empath. They don't just see surface-level actions, they pick up the emotional subtext behind every gesture, every pause, every smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this is deeply unsettling because they've spent a lifetime cultivating invisibility. They've trained themselves to hide their fears, their vulnerabilities and their needs, believing that revealing even a fragment of themselves will leave them exposed or unworthy. But the super empath isn't fooled by distractions or distraction smokescreens. They notice patterns, the recurring ways avoidants push people away, the subtle attempts to regain control, even the carefully crafted charm that masks insecurity. The more the avoidant tries to hide, the more illuminated they become. And this illumination doesn't come with judgment or criticism. It's just raw awareness. It's almost like holding up a mirror that reflects not just the surface, but the quiet corners of their emotional world they've tried to keep locked. And because this recognition isn't aggressive or manipulative, it quietly undermines the avoidant's sense of mastery over their environment. They may try to shrug it off, dismiss it as coincidence, or even attempt to manipulate the empath into overlooking the truth. But a super empath remains attuned. They don't ignore the signs, and they don't let the avoidant slip into emotional invisibility. Each time the avoidant tries to withdraw or deflect, the empath's perception subtly confirms that their defenses are transparent, that the walls they've built to protect themselves are visible to someone who understands without needing to be told. This level of insight can quietly erode the avoidant's confidence because it challenges the very skill they've relied on for so long, staying unreadable. The avoidance that once felt like control now feels exposed, uncomfortable, and even vulnerable. Simply by being deeply present, observing without judgment, and responding with emotional intelligence, the super empath demonstrates a kind of power that doesn't need to shout or prove itself. It exists in quiet awareness, in noticing what the avoidant thought no one could see, and in doing so, it changes the dynamics of interaction without a single harsh word being spoken. When an avoidant feels cornered, overwhelmed, or even just nudged too close, their instinct is almost always the same: pull away. They create distance either physically, emotionally, or through silence, because that distance gives them a sense of control, a way to protect themselves from vulnerability. Most people respond to this by panicking, chasing, or trying to break through the walls, which only confirms the avoidant's belief that closeness is dangerous. But a super empath operates differently. Instead of reacting with fear or frustration, they remain calm, steady, and present. They don't argue, they don't pressure, and they don't beg for reassurance. Their calmness is not passive, it is powerful. It signals to the avoidant that the rules of engagement they've relied on no longer work. The avoidant has always believed that their distance will create tension, guilt, or anxiety in others, and that this tension will give them leverage. But when the empath simply stays centered, neither chased nor shaken, the avoidant is confronted with something entirely unfamiliar, someone who doesn't lose themselves in the game of push and pull. Each withdrawal or silent treatment is met with calm awareness, not panic, and over time this quiet strength begins to unsettle the avoidant. The things they have counted on to maintain control, the emotional reactions of others, are no longer predictable or manipulable. And it's not about manipulation on the empath side, it's about self-possession. By remaining composed, the empath demonstrates that their world does not revolve around the avoidant's ability to distance or disrupt, and in doing so, they subtly undermine the avoidant's confidence. The avoidant may begin to question their usual strategies. Why isn't this person reacting like everyone else? Why doesn't their withdrawal produce the tension they're used to? The calm, steady presence of the empath exposes the fragility of the avoidance methods without a single confrontation. It quietly communicates that emotional games are no longer effective and that closeness can exist without drama, panic, or pressure. This isn't something that can be argued away, and it doesn't need to be justified. It's simply an unwavering example of what stability and emotional intelligence look like in action. And for someone who thrives on maintaining control through avoidance, it's disorienting in the best possible way. The avoidant begins to see that the empath's calm is not weakness, and their power lies not in chasing or manipulating, but in being grounded, self-aware, and unaffected by the emotional distancing tactics that have always defined their relationships. A super empath has this remarkable ability to love deeply without losing themselves in the process. They bring warmth, presence, and care into a relationship, but they do not let the other person's behavior define their worth or dictate their emotional state. This is profoundly unsettling for someone who is avoidant because they're used to relationships being a power struggle, a delicate dance where closeness triggers fear and distance is their refuge. Avoidants often assume that the person who cares more will bend, compromise their boundaries, or even sacrifice their identity to maintain connection. But the super empath breaks that pattern by showing that deep love and self-respect can coexist. They listen with empathy without letting every withdrawal or defensive tactic feel like a personal attack. They respond with understanding rather than overreaction. They offer support without overextending themselves, and in doing so, they demonstrate a level of emotional balance that avoidants rarely encounter. The avoidant who expects instability, drama, or neediness is faced instead with someone whose heart is expansive but whose footing is steady. This balance subtly forces the avoidant to confront their own emotional limitations. They realize that closeness does not have to feel suffocating or dangerous, that trust does not have to lead to control, and that vulnerability is not inherently weak. For the avoidant, this can feel disarming. They may find themselves questioning their usual defense mechanisms. Why does this person's love feel safe? Why am I not compelled to pull away, manipulate, or guard myself as I usually do? The empath's ability to remain fully themselves while offering love quietly exposes the avoidant's reliance on avoidance as a protective strategy. The more the empath embodies emotional maturity, the more the avoidant sees the contrast between their own fears and insecurities and the empath's grounded presence. It is not a confrontation, and it is not a critique. It is simply a demonstration of what a healthy, emotionally intelligent connection looks like. And over time, that demonstration chips away at the avoidant's confidence in their old patterns. The avoidant begins to feel the subtle power of someone who can love without being controlled, who can feel deeply without being dependent, and who can remain authentic in a relationship without needing to manipulate the other person to feel safe. This quiet, unwavering self-possession is one of the most disorienting forces an avoidant can encounter because it exposes a new way of relating, one where love and autonomy coexist seamlessly, and it shows them without words or confrontation that their usual strategies for maintaining control are not only unnecessary, but ineffective in the presence of a true empath. A super empath knows how to set boundaries without creating drama or conflict, and this ability can quietly shake an avoidant's confidence more than any confrontation ever could. Avoidants often operate on the assumption that closeness comes with chaos, that being challenged, being asked for accountability, or facing a line in the sand will provoke fear, guilt, or withdrawal in the other person. They expect pushback to look like argument, manipulation, or emotional collapse. But when a super empath sets a boundary, it doesn't come with anger or threat. It comes with clarity, calmness, and self-respect. The boundary is firm yet gentle, communicated with confidence and without unnecessary explanation, because the empath understands their own worth and doesn't feel the need to justify it. This is disorienting for the avoidant because it breaks the familiar pattern they rely on. Their usual tactics, stonewalling, minimizing, withdrawing, or testing the other person, suddenly lose their impact. The empath is not reacting out of fear or ego. They are simply protecting their emotional integrity. Each time the avoidant attempts to push the boundary or skirt around it, they encounter resistance that is not aggressive but unwavering. The calm, composed refusal to allow overstepping communicates a subtle but powerful message. Closeness will not come at the expense of respect. This demonstration of self-possession quietly undermines the avoidant's sense of control. They're used to dictating the emotional pace of a relationship, assuming that the person they are with will bend, negotiate, or capitulate in the face of withdrawal or tension. But with a super empath, that assumption no longer holds. The avoidant begins to question the efficacy of their strategies. The gentle firmness of the empath exposes the gaps in their ability to manipulate or evade without consequence. And because this is done without aggression or dramatics, it doesn't trigger the usual defenses in the avoidant. Instead, it creates a quiet, almost disarming self-reflection. The avoidant is faced with someone who is not only emotionally intelligent, but also unshakable in their sense of self. This contrast between the empath's calm authority and the avoidant's habitual defense mechanisms subtly erodes their confidence. Over time, the avoidant comes to realize that they cannot rely on fear, distance, or games to dominate the emotional landscape. Boundaries that are enforced with grace rather than conflict demonstrate that emotional strength doesn't need to be loud, confrontational, or reactive. It is quiet, consistent, and entirely self-contained, and that quiet strength can quietly dismantle the avoidant sense of invulnerability in ways that no argument, chase, or dramatic showdown ever could. A super empath is willing to walk away when respect, care, or emotional reciprocity is missing, and this choice can be one of the most unsettling experiences for an avoidant. Avoidants often rely on the assumption that the people who love them will endure anything, that they can take and withhold affection without consequence. They expect their partners to bend, compromise, or tolerate emotional inconsistency because that has historically allowed them to maintain control and emotional distance. But a super empath does not play into that pattern. They love deeply and invest sincerely, but they also recognize their own worth and refuse to remain in a relationship where respect and mutual care are absent. Walking away is not an act of punishment, and it is not revenge. It is a quiet assertion of self-respect, a demonstration that their time, energy, and emotional labor are not expendable commodities. For the avoidant, this is jarring because it confronts a core belief they hold that their partner's attachment and presence are unconditional regardless of behavior. The empath's departure forces the avoidant to reckon with the reality that their usual tactics, withdrawal, avoidance, or emotional withholding, can no longer guarantee compliance or maintain the illusion of control. It exposes the fragility of the avoidant's influence and highlights the consequences of their emotional evasiveness without any need for argument or confrontation. This act of leaving quietly communicates power in a way the avoidant cannot ignore, that love, patience, and attention have boundaries, and that these boundaries are enforced with dignity, not drama. The absence of chaos or manipulation makes the message even more potent. The avoidant is left to reflect on the choices they made and the relationship they allowed to unfold. They are confronted with the truth that their patterns of avoidance, testing, and emotional withdrawal were met not with frantic pursuit, desperation, or attempts to control them, but with quiet, self-assured disengagement. This realization can quietly dismantle their confidence because it demonstrates that their emotional games are ineffective against someone who knows their own worth. The empath's decision to walk away shows that emotional power does not come from manipulation, control, or distance. It comes from self-possession, awareness, and the courage to honor one's own needs. And for the avoidant, witnessing this without drama or vindictiveness challenges their long-held assumptions about relationships and power dynamics. It is the ultimate paradox for them. The very love and care they thought they could exploit becomes the measure by which they are confronted with their own limits. And the empath's quiet departure communicates that boundaries and self-respect cannot be negotiated, coerced, or ignored. In the end, the power of a super empath is quiet but undeniable. They don't need to fight, manipulate, or argue to make a point. Simply by being fully themselves, aware, loving, calm, and grounded, they expose patterns, challenge defenses, and inspire reflection. For an avoidant, this presence is disarming because it reveals the truth they've long tried to hide, that control, distance, and avoidance are not the keys to meaningful connection. Instead, the empath's strength lies in their authenticity, their boundaries, and their willingness to walk away when respect is absent. And in that quiet demonstration of self-respect, relationships are transformed, patterns are challenged, and growth becomes inevitable. Thank you all for listening and for taking the time to reflect on the subtle ways emotional intelligence can change the dynamics of connection. Remember, true power isn't loud. It's grounded, steady, and unapologetically authentic. I appreciate you being here today, for your openness and willingness to explore this deeper understanding of human relationships. Thank you, and I hope you take this awareness with you, applying it not just to avoidance, but to every connection in your life where respect, clarity, and authenticity matter.